I used to think my parents were the kind of couple everyone envied. My father, with his steady smile and firm handshake, was the sort of man neighbors called dependable. My mother carried warmth in her voice, the kind that softened arguments before they could grow sharp. Together they seemed like a team, a partnership built on laughter, shared routines, and an ease that suggested years of genuine affection. To the world outside, and to me as their child, they were the picture of stability. That illusion began to crack on the nights they said they were staying up late to watch movies. The first time I noticed, I was too young to think anything of it. They disappeared into the living room after dinner, the glow of the television spilling into the hallway. I fell asleep believing the soundtrack of muffled voices and the occasional burst of laughter was exactly what they said it was, films they loved and wanted to revisit together. It sounded harmless, almost charming, like two teenagers refusing to let adulthood steal away their late-night fun. But repetition dulls innocence. The more those nights stretched on, the more the details nagged at me. My father would look oddly refreshed in the morning, as if he had slept longer than the rest of us. My mother, in contrast, dragged herself through breakfast, her eyes rimmed red, her patience thin. Their mismatched energies unsettled me. If they had been up until dawn, shouldn't they both be exhausted? I told myself it was nothing. I wanted to believe it was nothing. Still, fragments lodged in my memory, the low thrum of whispers when the television was muted, the way the curtains were always drawn tightly, the sharp hush of movement when I padded into the kitchen for a glass of water. At first, I convinced myself that I was being dramatic. Parents deserved privacy, after all. Perhaps they simply valued their late-night talks more than I understood. And yet, there were moments when their smiles felt brittle. My father would tease my mother at the breakfast table, and she would laugh, but the sound rang hollow. Later that day, she might snap at him over something trivial, then look away quickly, as if ashamed. I began to wonder whether the nights were bringing them closer, or pulling them apart. The house itself seemed to change on those evenings. The air grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. From my room, I sometimes caught the faint rhythm of laughter, too soft, too intimate to belong to any movie. It was a sound I could not place, one that left me restless under my blanket. Children are sensitive to atmospheres, and though I lacked the words to describe it, I felt the ground shifting beneath what I thought was solid. I tried to rationalize what I heard. Maybe the movies were old classics with quiet dialogue. Maybe my parents were just whispering so they wouldn't wake me. Maybe everything was exactly as they claimed. And yet a part of me, small but insistent, pressed against those excuses. If everything was innocent, why did their voices dip whenever I approached? Why did silence slam down the moment the floorboard creaked under my foot? One evening, curiosity nearly overcame me. I stood outside the living room door, the glow of the television seeping through the thin crack beneath. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling with the desire to fling it open and prove myself wrong, or right. But fear rooted me in place. What if they grew angry? What if I shattered the image I needed to believe in? My throat tightened, and I retreated to my room, heart pounding against the secret I was too afraid to uncover. Looking back, I think that was the moment when the seed of doubt first lodged itself in me. I didn't yet understand betrayal. I didn't yet comprehend the ways love could twist itself into shadows. But I understood enough to know that what my parents called movie nights wasn't as simple as they wanted me to believe. At the time, though, I kept my silence. I clung to the hope that the truth was kinder than my imagination. I told myself stories of romance and nostalgia, of a couple reliving old favorites, building a ritual that belonged only to them. I needed to believe that version. Still, the thought whispered at the back of my mind every time I heard their muffled laughter in the dark, this is not what it seems. And I would discover, all too soon, how right that whisper was. The nights of supposed movie marathons did not fade. They multiplied, until they became an unspoken routine. At first once a week, then twice, then so often that silence in the house after bedtime felt unusual. The ritual etched itself into our lives with a persistence I could not ignore. Patterns emerged. My father lingered longer at work, often arriving home late with excuses about sudden deadlines or impromptu meetings. His tie was loosened but his hair looked freshly combed, as if he had stopped somewhere before returning. When my mother greeted him at the door, Their smiles struck me as rehearsed, bright, stretched thin, too quick to vanish once the pleasantries ended. What unsettled me most was how the change seemed invisible to everyone else. Neighbors still praised them as the perfect couple. My friends, when they visited, spoke of how lucky I was to live in such a stable home. I would nod, smile, and swallow the unease gnawing inside me. If I confessed what I saw and heard, I feared no one would believe me. But my ears caught details that no outsider ever could. I overheard the clink of glasses in the middle of the night, the scrape of chairs shifting, the hurried hush of voices when footsteps crossed the hallway. Once, I even caught my father's laugh, low, playful, strangely boyish. It didn't sound like the man who read the newspaper every morning with solemn concentration. It was the laugh of someone lighter, someone unburdened, as if the daylight version of him was only a mask. My mother, too, shifted before my eyes. During the day, she seemed drained, her gaze distant as she stirred a pot or folded laundry. Her words to me grew shorter, as if each syllable carried too much weight. But when night arrived, when my father announced another movie marathon, her demeanor brightened in an unsettling way. She hummed while setting out snacks, dabbed perfume on her wrists, smoothed her hair with a deliberation that had nothing to do with watching a screen in the dark. I told myself perhaps this was their way of keeping love alive. Maybe they truly did cherish those evenings as sacred time together. Still, I could not shake the dissonance. Why did their closeness at night leave such distance during the day? The house bore witness to the growing tension. Walls that had once echoed with ordinary chatter now seemed to absorb secrets. Dinner conversations grew sparse. I often found myself staring at their faces across the table, searching for cracks. My father's eyes darted away too quickly when I caught his gaze. My mother's smile wavered before it reached her eyes. The more I noticed, the harder it became to pretend. I began cataloging the inconsistencies like puzzle pieces. My father's shirts sometimes carried faint traces of cologne not his own. My mother's phone, left unattended once, lit up with a message she snatched away before I could read. Their laughter, when it floated through the walls at night, was punctuated by silences too long to belong to film dialogue. One night, emboldened by curiosity, I crept from my room again. I pressed my ear against the living room door, breath shallow. What I heard froze me, not the soundtrack of a film, not even the rhythm of a casual conversation, but whispers, low, urgent, threaded with gasps and stifled sighs. The television hummed faintly in the background, but the screen might as well have been a prop. My hand trembled on the doorknob, yet I could not move. My chest tightened with the weight of realization, though I still lacked the courage to name it. I pulled back before they could sense me, but my legs shook as I stumbled to my room. That night, sleep did not come. My heart raced with the echo of sounds I was not meant to hear. In the days that followed, I watched them with sharper eyes. Every gesture seemed suspect. When my father brushed my mother's shoulder, I wondered whether it was tenderness or a performance for me. When she smiled at his jokes, I questioned whether she was laughing at him, or at the secret they shared behind closed doors. I wanted to confront them, but fear strangled me. What if I accused them and they denied everything? What if the truth, once spoken aloud, destroyed the fragile shell of normalcy we still had? My silence became its own kind of complicity, a shield and a prison. Yet the suspicion would not quiet. It grew sharper each night, each muffled laugh, each whispered phrase cut short. My parents thought they had hidden their truth well, but I was their child. Children notice what others miss. Children hear the fractures long before walls collapse. One evening, after yet another late-night ritual, I sat awake in my bed long after the house had stilled. A thought came to me, so stark it nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. They were not watching movies. They never were. And though I didn't yet know exactly what they were doing, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever was unfolding between them at night was the beginning of an unraveling that none of us could escape. The night of discovery began like all the others. Dinner passed in quiet politeness. My father pushed food around his plate, speaking little. My mother smiled too brightly when he complimented the stew, though I noticed her hand trembling as she cleared the dishes. By now I could predict the rhythm. Once the house settled into stillness, the charade would begin again. But that evening, a restless current pulled at me. I couldn't bury my unease under excuses anymore. The whispers and laughter had grown sharper, more reckless. Whatever they were hiding, it had reached a point where I needed to know, even if the truth shattered everything. Near midnight, I slipped from my room. The hall stretched before me, lit only by a sliver of television globe leading under the living room door. My bare feet barely whispered against the floorboards, but my heart pounded loud enough to betray me. This time, I did not stop at the door. I turned the knob slowly, inch by inch, and pushed it open. The sight inside is burned into me, a memory that refuses to fade. The television flickered on mute, playing some forgotten film that neither of them was watching. My parents sat pressed close together, not in the casual sprawl of people sharing entertainment, but in the deliberate intimacy of bodies entwined. My father's hand slid along her thigh, her lips brushed his ear, and their eyes, hungry, electric, were locked on each other, not the screen. It wasn't simply the physical closeness that unsettled me. It was the atmosphere, thick and charged, a kind of ritual intimacy I had never witnessed before. They weren't just watching movies. They weren't even pretending to. They were lost in each other, building a private world I was never meant to see. My breath caught, and the sound betrayed me. Their heads snapped up. My mother's face drained of color, her mouth opening without a word. My father froze, hand still lingering where it shouldn't have been. For a split second, the illusion cracked completely, and all I saw were two strangers cloaked in guilt. I fled before either of them could speak. My feet carried me back to my room, door slammed, heart pounding as though it might break free from my chest. I pressed myself against the mattress, trembling, replaying what I had seen again and again. The betrayal cut deeper than I could name. They hadn't lied to each other. They hadn't broken vows to outsiders. They had betrayed me, their child, the person they insisted on protecting with bedtime stories and morning kisses. All those nights of whispered laughter, all those reassurances of, just movies, had been weapons of deceit wielded against my trust. I lay awake until dawn, hollow and furious, wondering what love truly meant if this was how two people expressed it. If they loved each other so fiercely in the dark, why did daylight leave them so cold? Why did their affection require lies, shadows, secrecy? The next morning, they behaved as though nothing had happened. My father read the paper. My mother buttered toast. Their hands moved calmly, but their eyes avoided mine. The silence between us roared louder than any accusation. I understood then that they knew I had seen, and they would rather preserve the lie than face the truth. That silence became its own kind of cruelty. Each glance across the breakfast table carried the weight of a secret none of us dared to name. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tear down the fragile performance they still clung to. But the words lodged in my throat, too jagged to escape. Instead, I withdrew. I avoided their touch, spoke in clipped replies, disappeared into my room whenever I could. My retreat was my rebellion, though they pretended not to notice. In their eyes, perhaps ignoring the fracture was easier than mending it. But I noticed everything. The way my father's hand shook slightly when he folded the newspaper. The way my mother's laugh cracked at odd moments. They were unraveling, whether they admitted it or not. And I was unraveling with them. From that night forward, I could no longer see them as the perfect couple. They had revealed themselves as human, flawed, selfish, consumed by desires they hid even from their child. And in that revelation, something inside me shifted forever. Love, I realized, was not always gentle. Sometimes it was greedy. Sometimes it demanded lies. Sometimes it thrived in the dark, even while daylight demanded honesty. I had uncovered their secret, but it wasn't clarity I gained. It was a wound, one that would shape every memory of them from that point on. And though they thought my silence meant ignorance, I carried the truth like a stone in my chest, heavier with every passing day. Life after that night moved forward on the surface, yet beneath it everything had shifted. My parents continued their rituals of routine, morning coffee, evening news, weekend errands, but the rhythm was hollow. Every word exchanged at the table felt rehearsed, every gesture heavy with the knowledge of what we refused to acknowledge. I no longer trusted laughter in that house. When they chuckled at a television program, I wondered if the sound was genuine or another performance meant to convince me, and perhaps themselves, that everything was fine. Silence became my refuge. I answered questions with the shortest replies I could muster, avoided their eyes, and retreated into my room where the walls felt safer than their presence. The distance did not go unnoticed. My father's voice grew softer when addressing me, cautious, as if he feared stepping onto fragile glass. My mother, once quick to fuss over me, now hovered awkwardly, her hands ringing against one another when she lingered at my door. Neither dared to ask what I had seen, though both knew. That silence became a pact between us, a fragile agreement, pretend nothing had happened, and perhaps we could all endure. But endurance is not healing. The cracks in their union widened slowly. Arguments, once muffled, began seeping through the walls in sharper tones. They no longer bothered to draw the curtains as tightly at night. The so-called movie marathons dwindled, replaced by long stretches of cold distance. My father stayed later at work. My mother grew more irritable, her voice edged with bitterness. Whatever bond had once sustained them in the shadows was fraying in the daylight. For me, the collapse was both vindication and sorrow. Part of me felt grimly relieved that the lie could no longer hold, another part mourned the home I had once believed in. I had wanted to be wrong, to uncover some innocent explanation, but instead I had found proof that even love, the kind that seemed unshakable, could rot from within. It changed me. Trust no longer came easily. I began to question every smile, every promise, every expression of affection I encountered beyond our home. If my own parents, the very people who raised me, could hide truths behind drawn curtains and muted televisions, what hope was there that anyone else could be honest? And yet, amidst the disillusionment, a strange understanding took root. My parents were not monsters. They were not villains in some story designed for my punishment. They were human, flawed, vulnerable, desperate for something they could not sustain. Their late-night rituals were not meant to wound me, though they did. They were attempts to hold onto a connection they feared losing. In the deception, I glimpsed not malice but weakness, the kind that haunts all people in quiet moments. That realization did not erase the pain, but it reshaped it. It taught me that love is not a perfect shield against loneliness. It taught me that even the strongest seeming bonds can falter under the weight of unspoken truths. And it taught me, above all, that humanity's strength lies not in perfection, but in its ability to stumble, to break, and still continue. Years later, when I look back on those nights, the memory no longer burns as sharply as it once did. The wound remains, but it has scarred over, transformed into a lesson I carry. My parents stayed up all night, claiming to watch movies, but what they were really doing was teaching me something unintended, that people are fragile, that love is complicated, and that the truths we hide often shape others more than we ever realize. I sometimes wonder if they knew the cost of their silence. Perhaps they thought they were sparing me. Perhaps they believed their secret could remain contained between them. They were wrong. Secrets leak into the air of a household. They echo in the footsteps, linger in the laughter, poison the quiet moments. I breathed that air, and it marked me. Still, I endure. I carry their failures, but I also carry the knowledge that even in failure there is humanity. We stumble, we falter, we deceive, yet we continue striving for connection, however clumsily. That is what makes us human, both our tragedy and our triumph. So when I remember those nights, I do not think only of betrayal. I think of the lesson buried within the hurt, that love, flawed as it is, remains the most human pursuit of all. They thought I never knew. They thought their secret was safe behind closed doors and muted screens. But I knew. I always knew, and it taught me more about people, about love, about weakness, about the desperate hunger for closeness, than any story ever could.